Hello, I'm Bill Fountain. Today I'm going to give you 1 minute's opinion of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops in their letter to Congress regarding the federal budget. And on this area, whereas I feel like that they're concerned about the cuts to the federal welfare programs, and they want a well-funded federal welfare programs. And they use the Catholic Catechism of the Catholic Church for the basis of much of their decisions, and they rightly point out about the common good that we as citizens want to be able to, and that means to be able to respect the person, the human development, and a just peace. In other words, law and order, so that we're all able to have real freedom. However, I think they fail to address one of the parts that's in this catechism, and about when you're helping the needy and the poor and the needy, and that is about voluntary and generous participation. In one of the cases is, for instance, like taxes, where this is what uses to fund the federal budget, is on my part is not voluntary. I'm obligated to pay my taxes, and so therefore I'm not being able to exercise this voluntary and generous participation. It may be generous because of the amount of taxes I have to pay, but one of the other reasons I'm not really liking taxes is because I not necessarily agree how the federal government spends all of our money. And it's going to bring me to 3 more items that I want to address here, and one of them is about that Jesus says about loving God and your neighbor, also about the excessive intervention of the state that can be threatening our personal freedom and our initiative, and subsidiarity, which I'll explain shortly. All right. So first, let's talk about in Matthew's Gospel, Jesus was asked about, what are the greatest commandments, and he said, the love of God, love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul, and with all your mind. And then the second, he said, is like that of loving your neighbor as yourself. Well, the bishops did not mention this about loving God first, and we need to know that before we have really any idea of how to love our neighbor or ourselves. Even Mother Teresa goes on to say that she helps others for the love of God. All right? So if we love ourselves, that's one of the first things we need to do before we can understand how to love our neighbor. And I know that I personally, if I want to be able to stand on my own, I don't want to be dependent on others or lose a desire to work, because God made us to work. He built, created the creation in 7 days or 6 days, and then he rested. So we need to work just like God does. And in fact, later on, St. Francis says that we do not want to live off the backs of others. Well, this is something that has been created through time that we have to be aware of, that the federal welfare programs have been creating helplessness, in other words, disincentive to work. That is something that is known. In fact, it was recognized by President Roosevelt many years ago when he said about the welfare programs that continued dependence upon the relief induces a spiritual and moral disintegration fundamentally destructive to the national fiber. To dole out relief in this way is to administer a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. Later on, I'll also talk about what John Paul II says. Well, who knows our neighbor best? Well, the Catechism teaches us about subsidiarity, and there's several paragraphs that they talk about that. And what that means is the responsibility for any task is delegated to the smallest capable unit. All right, so instead of having a large bureaucracy, it's going down closer to the individual rather than at a high bureaucracy. This principle is essentially opposed to central planning, in other words, the socialization of the federal welfare programs. It is also a principle of economic efficiency. You get more bang for your buck by being closer to the people who are needy and poor. Limited government and personal freedom is a consequence of the subsidiary, and it conflicts with the passion for centralization and the bureaucratic characteristics of the welfare state. In fact, John Paul II took this on about this social assistant state in his encyclical in 1991, and he wrote that the welfare state is contradicting the principle of subsidiarity by intervening directly and depriving society of its responsibility. This leads to a loss of human energies and an inordinate increase in public agencies, which are dominated more by bureaucratic ways of thinking than by concern for serving their clients, which are accompanied by enormous increase in spending. All right, so let's go to the last one of my concerns, and that is I am suspicious of the motivations of politicians who support these anti-poverty programs, given what's in history. In the 19th century, German Chancellor Bismarck, he constructed the first world's nanny state for the sole purpose of making the German citizens so codependent on the Third Reich of the government that they would never, ever think about rebelling against it. His goal was not improving the common man's lot, but it was his way of inducing the common man, when faced with difficulties, to expect the state to look after him instead of relying on himself to solve his own problems. So why do the bishops support a federal welfare state? It could be out of the goodness of their heart, they're concerned for the poor and needy, but often it could lead to a nanny state where the recipients are treated as children and thus not restrict and grow. And as parents, we know that is something that we go, particularly during the teenage years, is something that they are trying to, that your student and your children are striving for freedom, and you guide them along that way. But you do not create a nanny state, otherwise they're going to be living in your basement forever. Now, there is an economic theory that talks about that where the politicians and welfare recipients actually become codependent, and it's called a public choice of economic theory. And essentially says that the politicians are working, they say they're working for the common good to help the people out, but really they're out there really self-serving for votes. In other words, the more dependent that people are on the state, the more programs that can be enacted, and therefore more votes can be given back to the politicians. Well, I think it's going to take courage to be able to right this ship of this welfare state, and maybe President Trump can do that. Lastly, in summary, I think it's good that the bishops are concerned about the poor, but I suggest they follow the teachings of the Catechism and John Paul II about subsidiarity. Also, work towards shrinking the federal welfare programs and their insidious disincentives on work, trying to get the people more back to work and not being dependent on the state. And that creates greater freedom for them. And also foster models of anti-poverty healthcare programs at the community, school, and parish level. So, thank you for watching.